Welcome to day 187 on the trail. We have three readings for today from 1 Timothy chapter 6 verses 2b through 21, 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 1 through chapter 2 verse 32, and 2 Maccabees chapter 12 verses 38 through 45. We begin today with the book of 2 Samuel, which opens with David receiving the news of Saul's death. The news is given to David by a resident alien living in Israel who was a descendant of the Amalekites, one of Israel's long-term enemies from the days of the Exodus. However, as the son of a resident alien, he would have had some rights in Israel, but not full citizenship. One question that we may want to explore is why the account of Saul's death differs from what is recorded in 1 Samuel 31 verses 1 through 7. Here, we find that Saul dies at his own hand. In 1 Samuel 31, beginning in verse 3, the battle pressed hard upon Saul. The archers found him, and he was badly wounded by them. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, so that these uncircumcised may not come and thrust me through and make sport of me." But his armor-bearer was unwilling, for he was terrified. So Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. When his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. However, when the Amalekite appears before David, the story changes. In 2 Samuel chapter 1, beginning in verse 6, the young man reporting to him said, "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul, leaning on his spear, while the chariots and the horsemen drew close to him. When he looked behind him, he saw me, and called to me. I answered, 'Here, sir.' And he said to me, 'Who are you?' I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' He said to me, 'Come, stand over me, and kill me, for convulsions have seized me, and yet my life still lingers.' So I stood over him and killed him, for I knew that he could not live after he had fallen. I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my lord." So why does this Amalekite change the story when he presents David with Saul's crown and armlet? The crown and armlet were obviously intended to lend credibility to his story. But why claim that he is responsible for Saul's death unless he hoped to receive some benefit from David? Perhaps he was expecting that once David assumed the throne, he would reward this Amalekite for eliminating David's enemy. However, as we have seen throughout 1 Samuel, David has shown tremendous respect for God's anointed king, sparing Saul's life on multiple occasions. Therefore, when this man confesses to killing Saul, David has him executed. David's harsh response also counters any possible suggestion or accusation that David had a hand in Saul's death or Israel's defeat at the hands of the Philistines. After all, David and his men had been part of the Philistine ranks prior to the Battle of Gilboa. Therefore, this account reflects both David's innocence in the death of Saul and his loyalty to Israel. Now, David will assume the throne as Israel's second king. However, the situation is still dire. The Philistines were once more in control of Israelite cities following the battle. Israel's first king, Saul, was defeated, and David's city, Ziklag, lay in ruins following the attacks of the Amalekites. So after consulting God, David moves to Hebron. From there, David will begin the work of rebuilding the nation and establishing his reign. Turning now to the New Testament. Today we conclude 1 Timothy. In these final instructions, Paul connects those who engage in theological controversies, speculations, and arguments with the pursuit of wealth. While it is beneficial and good to pursue godliness, the motivation should never be for financial gain. Instead, the quest for godliness should lead to contentment. As we find in 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 6, "Of course, there is great gain in godliness, combined with contentment. For we brought nothing into the world, so that we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with these. But those who want to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. The path that Paul outlines here begins with controversies and disagreements that may appear harmless on the surface. However, the motive that lies underneath the surface is where the true danger is found. As Paul states in verse 4, those who engage in such practices which cause dissensions are motivated by conceit and self-interest. Instead of focusing on the gospel of Christ, they draw attention to themselves. Then, becoming corrupt and deprived of the truth, they become trapped by their own desires, including wealth. However, as Paul points out, the love of wealth is only the beginning. Again, as Paul states in verse 10, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. What begins with conceit and self-centeredness leads to the love of wealth and the abandonment of the way of Jesus. And this includes the quest for power and popularity, pursuing the approval of the world instead of the approval of God. Instead of seeking to follow the path of the crucified Messiah, who gave everything for his people, they seek to benefit from the work of Jesus for their own selfish gain. As Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, and perhaps a disciple of the Apostle John, wrote in the 2nd century, "But the love of money is the beginning of all troubles. Knowing therefore that we brought nothing into the world, neither can we carry anything out, let us arm ourselves with the armor of righteousness, and let us teach ourselves first to walk in the commandments of the Lord." However, it should be noted that wealth itself does not seem to be the problem. Instead, it is the love of wealth that is where the real problem is found. Beginning in verse 17, we find instructions from Paul for those who have abundant financial resources. As for those who in the present age are rich, command them not to be haughty, or to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but rather on God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, generous, and ready to share, thus storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of the life that really is life. So today, may we seek to take hold of our life in Christ, where true life is found. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.